couple things. Why do we do the things the way we do it? Because we went through 5 books of Moses, then we got some of the historical books, like Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, and then suddenly we jumped into Psalms, then Job, then Proverbs. Okay, why? Very reasonable question. The answer is, theoretically, we should have go through 1st and 2nd Samuel, and then 1 Kings, chapters 1 through 11. Because this is the story of the guy who we all know is related to the books of wisdom. Okay? Whose story is here? Any guesses? Solomon, right. Okay? But since 1st and 2nd Kings is one book divided in 2 parts, I decided that we will have 1st and 2nd Samuel and have books of wisdom inserted here, and then we'll go through the rest. Just so you will be utterly confused, so that's my explanation.
Why not?
Sure, yeah.
We like to be confused.
Okay? Now, there is another reason, actually. If you begin to look at books in their more chronological and thematical order, you will see that some of them, we've talked about this, that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. First 7 books of the Bible are related to 7 days of creation. Genesis is the book of beginnings. Exodus, we see the kind of place that on one hand divides, on the other hand connects God and people. We see the wilderness that divides Israelites from Egyptians, but we also see the construction of the tabernacle that is on one hand, again, divides people from God, but on the other hand, that's the place of connection with God. Then we have Leviticus, like connected with the day 3. Then Numbers, day 4, we have the theme of lights there. If you go to your notes, that's somewhat reflected there. Then on day 5, we have a swarm of fish, or fishes. Let's make it really bad. But it's like, because it's multiple. It's really many of them. Swarms of fishes and birds. And we have lots of rules and regulations in the book of Deuteronomy. And then on the 6th day, we know that the man was created. And Joshua is the guy who goes basically through a maturation process in the book. In the very beginning, people tell him, be strong, courageous. Yeah? Just be strong and courageous. And then there is a fun part, we will obey you like we obeyed Moses. And that's where you're supposed to laugh. Because we know how they obeyed Moses, okay? And they even say it out loud. It's so funny. When people say something really silly out loud, and people take it seriously. So that's this. And then the 7th day, where they should have a proper Sabbath, instead of that, that's where Genesis 3 is. And that's, a man and the woman are in the full, disarray. So the first Sabbath is messed up, and the theme of worship is very dominant and prominent for the book of Judges. And we see how they reject to worship God, and therefore they got into disaster. And then there is another cycle. So if you go following Judges, the book of Ruth tells you another set of beginnings. We see how Ruth connects with Genesis, that we have the genealogies from Genesis picked up in Ruth. We also see this theme of famine, which is not prominent for Exodus, but it is famine, at least 3 of them, that drives people away from the land into another and hardship circumstances. It is Abraham who goes into Egypt. It is Isaac who survives famine, and yet in the midst of famine, his crops are flourishing, and it is because of famine that Israel, with all his 12 kids, end up in Egypt. Okay, and then we have 1st and 2nd Samuel. that we see the preparation. So if in Exodus we see the construction of the tabernacle, in 1st and 2nd Samuel we see the preparation for construction of the temple. And then Psalms are connected with the book of Leviticus. And then the middle one, the fourth one in this cycle, is the book of Job that we studied last time. We see how the star, the ruler, goes down, goes through death and resurrection, goes through his night and day period, or he has first like semi-day, then he goes through the long night, but then he comes to full shining glory at the very end. Therefore, the book of Proverbs, actually, that what brings me to our lesson today, is very well connected with Deuteronomy. Okay? There are similarities between Proverbs and Deuteronomy, but there is something very important which separates them. Okay? In Deuteronomy, if you want to go to our blog, at the very end of the first page, and goes into second one. There are parallels between the book of Proverbs and Deuteronomy. Okay? Both begin with kind of like exhortation. In the book of Deuteronomy, in chapters 1 through 4, Moses reminds people of Israel of how they went through the wilderness, how Lord was faithful, how they behaved in such a way that even he, the great leader, has to stay here in the wilderness and be buried in the wilderness and will never see the land. Okay? Same thing. Chapters 1 through 9, we see the exhortations from the teacher, the king, to his son. The phrase, my son, is repeated 12 times. I mean, if you really want, you can like go home and have fun with that and try to structure it. And what you will find is you have my son, phrase my son, phrase my son, then my children. My son, my son. So it's like a very long song with few stanzas in it. So there is this great exhortation in the beginning. Then, like in the book of Deuteronomy, so let's do it this way. And Proverbs, we have long initial
Always.
long initial exhortation. Then, so basically like three parts. The second part is we have many rules. Or in case of Proverbs, it's not necessarily rules per se, it's more like suggestions. And that's where we'll come in a second. That's what differs Proverbs from Deuteronomy. But it's kind of like many sayings. That probably would be a better connection. And then we have something for memory. In case of Deuteronomy, we have song, which is given in Deuteronomy 32, that Moses kind of encourages people of Israel to sing at least once a year. Come together, be in the worship setting, and then sing this song. And what we have at the very end of the book of Proverbs, we also have a poem which is in chapter 31, verses 10 to 31. Okay, if you know your math, how many verses do we have here? How many? Yes, but if you include 10, if you do simple math, you just subtract. But if you need to include both your borders, so you will end up with 22. And we've talked about this. If you have your notes on Psalms, why 22 is significant in Hebrew texts? Because it reflects what?
The letters of the Bible.
Number of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Okay? Guess what? Verses 10 through 31 is an alphabetical acrostic. Every verse begins with appropriate letter of the Hebrew alphabet. The first begins with Aleph, Then Beit, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Het, Tet. I'm not going to repeat the whole alphabet. You know it by heart, you know. So we see this kind of song that is repeated time and over again. Kind of go a little bit, you know, beyond the scope of our our lesson. Very often, I was a witness when people try to use this song to teach women how they should behave. I would not suggest it for at least two reasons. Reason number one, it's unreal. Okay? If you guys want to force your wives to be that woman from, chapter 31, boy, I mean, I don't know how long she'll handle that, but not going to sleep and constantly work and work more than those who work for her house, because she is the one who prepares the tasks for them, and then she is the one who pays them afterwards. So that means she needs to, when everybody's already done with their task, they can sit and relax. She needs to go, check, make sure everything is done right. Then, cash goes, and the cash flow goes out, okay? So that's thing number one. The thing number two, with the same realm. She sees the field and buys it. Okay, I don't know how much is your bank account, but I don't think you can do it. You need to assess it. Is it reasonable to buy? So the person who is here is the Lady Wisdom that we actually meet in the very beginning in the long and initial exhortation. Okay, but there are lots of lessons you can learn from that. No questions asked. There is another reason why I don't think that this is a real passage for a real woman. And especially concerns men. If you want your wife to be a lady from chapter 31, you have to be a man from chapter 31.
Good luck.
Thank you.
So, great. I mean, it's a great aspirations. It's a great and noble idea to become a man from chapter 31. That means you need to be, at least on your local level, part of the, city assembly or city council or something like that. Because the guy who sits there, he is well known among the gates. He is well known as the ruler of the local society. Okay? So it's kind of interesting to observe those things, those words. And he is the one actually who provides for the field and the vineyard. So, fine, go. Now, kind of with all of that overall observations, let's step back. Let's observe the structure. On one hand, as I said, we have just many sayings. Or no, before we'll go into structure. An important difference between Deuteronomy and the Proverbs. Okay? The important difference is in Deuteronomy, we have the law. And when we hear the law, okay, what does it tell us? That's the rules. That's the regulations. I mean, if you see the sign, 65 miles an hour, I mean, theoretically, we all know, don't look at me like that, Scott, So, we all know the rules. That's how you're supposed to drive, okay? You're not supposed to tailgate. You're supposed to turn on blinkers. I mean, many people don't know. There is that simple device right behind the steering wheel. Turn on the blinker. I mean, I know. You kind of got it. It's my pet peeve, I don't understand why people don't do it. Because it's none of your concerns where I'm going. It kind of is, I kind of want to know how to maneuver. But different story. That's the rules. That's how it should work. Now, do you remember our wonderful timeline that I used to draw every lesson? Okay, let's go back and draw our timeline. If we believe, okay, this is 30 AD. Okay, that's Christ's time. That Moses gave his sermon roughly in 1405 BC. Okay? They left Egypt in 1445, so that means by the time they enter into the land, this is 1405 BC. Okay, if we believe with And we have wholehearted reason for that, to believe that the Proverbs is mostly, if not all, is done. And I will tell you why it's all actually done by Solomon. So Solomon is roughly in the times of, let's say, 1000, just approximate, 1000 BC, give or take. Okay? That means you have about 400 years to observe, to meditate, to think, and most importantly, apply the law, the Deuteronomy, in your life. I know none of us have lived, or at least plans to live 400 years. But what I mean is, from generation to generation, when you hear and see how it rolls over to another generation, you can understand that some of the rules, they do work. Some work to an extent, and what we have in Proverbs is an observation, and divine suggestions. That if you want to do something, sometimes not to break the rules, but you can have just a little bit different approach. Okay, the whole story of Solomon is built on wisdom. Okay, remember, one of the most famous stories. Two ladies come to him and say, "We both had sons." And she claims that this is her son, and I think this is my son. Where are you going to go? What verse in Deuteronomy will tell you how to handle that? None. You need to have wisdom. You need to think, in a sense, outside. I know it's a very famous phrase, in our days and age, outside of the box. Okay? And that's great to have a box. It's great to have something relatively rigid that kind of covers the main areas in your life. But then there is something that happens, and you're like, what are you going to do? A couple of weeks ago, I think, I reminded you. Remember the masks? Possibility to meet inside, not to meet inside, and all of that kind of stuff. You can go to, the LCMS Pastoral Handbook, open it up, and they will tell you nothing about that. Because it's not concerned with rules and regulations. Me and elders were very great and very supportive, had to come up on the spot the ways to continue to worship here without breaking the law. So we had it outside, we had, designated areas, all of that kind of stuff. We had curbside communion, lots of stuff. Okay? When the church got normal, we got into normal. But when something is off, you need to have wisdom to be guided. And that's the Proverbs. So if somebody takes the Proverbs as the book of rules, it's just a wrong approach, because Proverbs is not the book of rules. It's a book of observations, and that might work. You might try to think a little bit differently and see how it's gonna work in your life. So, with this preliminary stuff, let's go to the structure. So on your page, on kind of close to the top, we have few things. We have a first speech is my son or my sons or my children. And then chapter 10 begins with the phrase, the Proverbs of Solomon. And then it goes to chapter 22, where we have the words of the wise. And then we have more saying of the wise. If you go, let's go, for example, to 24:23. So Proverbs chapter 24, verse 23. These also are sayings of the wise. So scholars kind of noticed those things and broke the book into 7 main pieces. And then we have, beginning with chapter 25, including through 29, we have Proverbs of Solomon that were gathered or copied by the man under the rule of King Hezekiah. So when is King Hezekiah on our timeline? Anybody remember? What about Isaiah? because they were in the same time. Okay? Cool. No problem. 721. That's why I'm here. So, 721 BC. Okay? That means within about another 300 years, either something was lost or something was hidden. Okay? The current critical scholarship say that this is not the words of Solomon. Those guys basically faked his sayings, kind of absorbing what he used to say in the previous chapters. They wrote something similar. I don't believe it. I don't think that's what happened. That's the same stuff they claim that at this age, at this, date, that's where Deuteronomy appeared. Because they didn't find it in the temple, they just made it up. We have some theological problems if that's true. Because, for example, we've talked about this, that it's Deuteronomy who gives the clear-cut rules what the king of Israel should and should not do. Okay? And he should not multiply the gold, he should not multiply the wives, and he should not buy too many horses, and especially horses from Egypt. And if you go to where we are, 1 Kings 10 and 11, that's exactly what Solomon does. If we do not have Deuteronomy, and Solomon is here, if we do not have Deuteronomy, and Deuteronomy was produced in 700s, then we have no way to say that Solomon did something bad. Okay? So we need to understand that Deuteronomy is Mosaic, and the whole book of Proverbs actually belongs to Solomon. With two possible exceptions. Chapter 30, the words of Agur. Okay? And who is Agur? And especially we have his, it says Agur, son of, what's that? Jekah. Okay? Who is that? That name is never, ever, ever appears in the Bible in any other historical books. Okay? So therefore, I would take it conservatively to the point that I still believe that this is Solomon. The reason we use that is because the words of Agur, son of Jekah, can be translated as, and you have it in your pages, as the one who gathers people, and he is the obedient one, the son of obedience. Okay? And if you know anything about Ecclesiastes, the Ecclesiastes is the person, we usually translate it as a preacher, and that's what you heard today from the lectern. It's a good translation, but not necessarily the perfect one. It's actually using another term. It's Kohelet. In a week or two, we'll have a lesson on that, so I'll talk more about this. But just for now, it's another term to gather people together for worship. Okay? So he is the gatherer. Okay? On the other hand, the gatherer can be not only the one who gathers people, but the one who gathers or acquires stuff, things, or wisdom. And we know that Solomon is the one who has acquired so many things on one hand, but sayings of wisdom and sayings of beauty, and he compared, and he had, speeches about trees, ants, birds, flowers, and so on and so forth. Then, chapter 31, the words of King Lemuel that his mother taught him. So the last chapter of the book, where we have this beautiful passage about the woman. Again, the name of King Lemuel is unknown to the Bible, in the sense of it's here, but otherwise, neither in 1st, 2nd Kings, 1st, 2nd Samuel, definitely not in 1st, 2nd Kings, not in 1st, 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, not in Israel, not outside of Israel. We do not have it. So Lemuel can be translated as devoted to God. And we can think of that the Solomon, in his pre-fall stage, when he has his kids and teaches them and passes on to them the sayings of wisdom, he can be one who can be called devoted to God. Plus, the mentioning of his mother is somewhat important, because we do know who his mother is. Bathsheba, yeah. She's not probably the most glorious person in the Bible, but we can think that after, whatever happened, and she had lots of time to think and contemplate on some wise sayings and suggestions to her son. And if you look in chapter 31, most of her stuff is concerned with relationship to other women. Be careful here, be careful here. And here is the song of, again, Lady Wisdom that we actually meet first time in chapters 8 and 9. So that I personally believe, okay, that Proverbs from the very beginning to the very end the book is written by Solomon. But, I'm not going to fight over that. We have few main themes. Again, when you think about themes and Proverbs, what themes are not in Proverbs? But I kind of laid out few most obvious ones. The relationship between God and man, wisdom and folly, labor and laziness, friends, rule and leadership, and good rule, bad rule, so on and so forth. Word, tongue, family in both husband and wife, and parents and their children. And of course, life and death. And there are a couple things that I would like to share with you. The other parts, again, it is reflected in other parts of the Bible in a variety of ways. First of all, one of the main verse that I gave you as a memory verse from the Proverbs is 1:7, is the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. So it's 1:7. The memory verse is at the very end of the second page, and you know it. But the theme of fear of the Lord actually also comes up one or two few times in Psalms. Okay, it is in Psalms for example, in Psalm 111, verse 10, there is also idea of the fear of the Lord. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Okay. Also, in chapter 25 of Proverbs, we have a mentioning that the words of God, the words and the wisdom of God is better than gold and sweeter than the honey. Okay. We kind of heard it somewhere. We kind of heard it in Psalm 19. That's one thing. But Psalm 19 is basically, I didn't write it here, so you might want to add it, is actually based on a historical account. Who is the guy so wise that on one hand, he is like stronger than a lion and he gets honey out of the dead body of a lion, and he is also relatively rich. He ends up with some golds and pieces. Yes?
Was it Samson?
Samson, exactly. So if you go into the book of Judges in chapter 14, the Psalm 19 is based on that. And probably thinking about Samson's life, knowing how his father David composed the Psalm 19, Solomon gives this wise saying in chapter 25. So we can see how it relates. One page of the Bible to another page of the Bible. And then there is another thing. Same chapter 25 provides the background for Jesus' parable, one of the parables. In Proverbs 25, we find that, again, it's a suggestion. Do not put yourself forward in the king's presence or stand in the palace of the great, for it will be better to be told, come up here, come closer to the king, and than to be put lower in the presence of a noble. If you go into the Gospel of Luke chapter 14, let's go there for a second. So then in chapter 14, we have a parable of the wedding feast. When you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit do not sit down in the place of the honor. Okay? It's right there. Lest someone more distinguished than you will be invited by him, and who he invited, both of you, will come and say to you, give your place to this person. So when we read the words of Jesus, we need to understand that he is, if we claim that he is the son of David, okay? So who is the son of David? Solomon. But in the presence of Jesus, we have ultimate Solomon. He is the wisest of the wise. So he takes the Proverbs and puts them into his preaching context and even turns them into something even more beautiful. So it's not just simply as suggestions. He turns it into a parable about wedding feasts that we all know and adore for these Eucharistical, Holy Communion, conceptions that we can draw from here. There are a couple of things that it's very interesting. When I was preparing the lesson, it was very interesting for me that the couple of things are in our confessions, in the Formula of Concord, are based on the teaching of Proverbs. In the Formula of Concord is the phrase from 17:15, he who justifies the wicked. And it's kind of, when it goes into discussion of righteousness by faith, this is a background verse which our confessors used to explain their position, that actually we need to understand that even in Old Testament, people were not justified by works within the whole life or within the life of the world, within the whole creation time, people were justified by faith. And there is another one, the phrase from 22:8, train up the child in the beginning, and he will not deviate, when he gets older. That one is used in the catechism, in the large catechism, to actually establish a good foundation or establish a solid biblical foundation for godly parenting. That we need to train up our children. And it's better to train them than to deal with some, rod and, some other hard measures, let's put it this way. One current wise man said, it doesn't matter. We need to invest our money. Either we will invest them in Christian schools or we will invest them into prison chaplaincy. So we just need to figure out where we're going to invest them. So that's very simple. That's probably all I would like to mention for right now. Just point out the last memory verse. Like in Deuteronomy, where we have, do not add to God's word. That's one more parallel between Proverbs and Deuteronomy. At the very end, we also have this statement. Every word of God proves true. He is a shield to those who take refuge in him. Do not add to his words, lest he rebuke you, and you will be found a liar. Okay? So on one hand, we have these observations. We have these divine suggestions. But at the very end, even the author, and I believe it's Solomon, even the author of the book of Proverbs says that all of those suggestions are based on the Word of God. The Word of God which should be applied to our life. The very last thing that I want to say, it is very cool to see that the book is divided in 31 chapters. Okay? In the regular month, we have either 30 or 31 days. So, for those of you who do not have a reading plan, don't worry about that. Begin to read a chapter of Proverbs a day. That's a really good start. So, today is 31st of July. Okay? Just open up, Proverbs 31. Tomorrow is August 1st. Okay? First chapter. August 2, second chapter, and so on and so forth. If you missed one, don't worry about that. Just look on the calendar. What day is it? Let's say 15th. Open up 15th chapter and you'll be fed. Okay? Questions or comments?